We are finishing off our Simplify series this morning, and we've had some great messages. We started off hearing how if we want a simplified life, we need to get a word from God and give Him access into every area of our lives. We spoke about how we need to live a focused life and not let all the distractions get into us. And then last week we spoke about how a simplified life is looking inside and investing into the right areas. Then this morning, I want to finish off this series by looking at a message called Maintaining Simplicity in the Midst of Chaos. Thank you, my love. I'll preach here. Not just because you're the best view in the house, but brownie points, guys. Maintaining simplicity in the midst of chaos. And the reason I want to end the series off like this is because the first 3 weeks, what we did is, how can we create simplicity in our lives? And that's important because the more simplicity we work into our own lives, the more we create simplicity in our lives, what we're doing is we're creating room for the miraculous. When we create simplicity in our lives, when we create rhythms of simplicity, when we allow simplicity to become our rhythm and the way we live, what we're doing is we're creating room to do we're creating room for God to do what He can do in our lives. So when it's a simplified life, God can do what He can do. And He brings the miraculous, and He brings His glory into our lives. And there's more room for joy, more room for peace, more room for time with our family. And so we really believe that a simplified life is the best way to begin, not just this year, but step into the rest of your life. But then, we can do all that we can do, but then sometimes what happens is, even when we've got a simple life, when we've done all that we can do, chaos, drama, complexity invades that. Sometimes we've done all we can do, but chaos, drama, complexity can still invade our simplified life. We had some friends driving through the Free State the one time, and they phoned us and they said, or we found out that they've just had an accident. And we knew the road that they were on. It was a double lane road. The speed limit on that road was 100 kilometers an hour. And so we obviously phoned them because we were concerned. All we knew was that they had an accident. And so we phoned them and we said, what's going on? And we kind of asked a couple of questions and we said, what's happened? And they hadn't hit anyone. There wasn't like a car-on-car collision. So it's not like anyone else had invaded their space. They hadn't invaded anyone else's space. It wasn't like they'd swerved off the road. They'd stayed in their lane. They had maintained focus. It wasn't like they'd hit a pothole. It wasn't like their road had become difficult. So all the things in life, they hadn't hit someone else hadn't invaded their life. It wasn't like they changed lanes. It wasn't like their road had gotten difficult. They had maintained the correct speed. They'd kept focus. No one else had invaded their space. What had happened was, on this road going 100 kilometers an hour, an ostrich had jumped out of the bushes and jumped onto the bonnet of their car while they were going at 100 kilometers an hour. And then the ostrich, after writing off their car, the car was written off, ran off into the bushes. Now, I tell this story, and it seems completely impossible. When we heard the story, it was like one of those moments where you sat on the phone, you're like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Oh, is there anything we can do? You hang up the phone and you're like, I don't actually believe it. This is not possible. But that's sometimes how drama is, isn't it? It's like sometimes drama is this crazy ostrich that comes, wrecks your life, wrecks your plans, and then disappears. And no one believes you. Because no one's going to believe that a crazy ostrich runs, writes off your car, and then disappears. Right? Everyone's going to ask, well, where's the ostrich? Because no one's going to believe that a car driving at 100 kilometers an hour, hitting an ostrich, there's not going to be an ostrich on the road. No one's believing that, right? And that's sometimes how drama is in our life. Sometimes drama comes out of nowhere. We're maintaining focus. We're going the right way. We're doing everything in the right way. But sometimes drama comes out of nowhere, hits us, derails all our plans, and then for no reason, we can't explain how or why it happened. And drama invades our lives. I'd had my whole message for this morning prepared, and I was going fine. And for me, my Saturday afternoon, evening has to be as simple as possible. I like my run-up to Sunday to be simple. I don't like there to be any complications. I want my Sunday, I don't even watch sports. Cheryl doesn't allow me to watch sport on Saturday night because that's a complication. Because if the Springboks lose, I need Jesus more than I've ever needed Jesus before in my life. Because I've just condemned referees to hell. It's bad for me, right? So I have to keep Saturday afternoons simple. At about 5:30 yesterday afternoon, Shiloh walks from the kitchen, because she's walking now, walks from the kitchen to where Cheryl was in the lounge, and halfway through she slips and bashes her head on our TV cabinet. Now, she's done this before. Don't phone Childline. Kids fall, right? It's what they do. They're resilient. You can see it's my second child. And so she fell. It did sound quite loud, so both Cheryl and I turned, because I was in the kitchen, she was in the, we turned and we're like, oh, you're okay. And as we picked her up, blood just started pouring. And so we're like, okay, this is not going to be a simple Saturday afternoon. And so we rushed her to the emergency room. Obviously, we had to take Ethan with us. 2 hours later, we brought our little girl home, 6 stitches and a big plaster. Not the simple Saturday afternoon I like leading up to having to preach on a Sunday morning. And it's exactly like that. Sometimes you've got everything in order. Sometimes your life is going in one way. You've done everything possible. Everything's nice and organized. And bam, drama and chaos falls in your lap. Sometimes chaos just arrives whether you're ready for it or not. And Jesus kind of was preparing us for this. Jesus knew this is the kind of world we live in. He said to us in John chapter 16, he said, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. Other translations say, in this world you will have trouble. In this world you will face issues. But take heart. I have overcome the world. Take heart, I have overcome the world. I think I kind of get the sense what Jesus is trying to tell us here is, if you're in this world, you have to become good at navigating unexpected drama. If you're going to be part of this world, if you're not going to move to some island and become a hermit, and even there you're going to face chaos, if you're going to be part of this world, you have to become good at navigating chaos. If you're going to be part of this world, you're going to have to become good at maintaining simplicity in the midst of chaos. How do we handle it when everything that we can do, we've done, but chaos still arrives at our doorstep? Now, here's the reality. When drama arrives, we can react in one of two ways. We can either elevate the drama, or we can dive deeper into the author of all peace. Those are our two options. When drama arrives, we can either elevate the drama or we can dive deeper into Him. And this morning, I want to unpack a story of actually one of my favorite characters in Scripture. And her life went from zero to more drama than we can possibly imagine in a moment of days. Her name is Hadassah. You might know her better as Esther. And her story is incredible. If you've never read her story, it's a whole book in the Old Testament called Esther. And for the sake of time this morning, I'm going to kind of paraphrase a lot of her story. Her story begins not even by talking about her. The story of Esther, the story of Hadassah, begins with the story of the king. And the king of that time, he was having this massive party. He was celebrating how big his kingdom was. He invites all his best friends to his house, which was the palace. It's nice when your house is the palace. And the Bible literally tells us he was showing off to such an extent that every single person in the palace had a different kind of golden cup and golden plate. Like it was lavish. And at one point during this party, he was showing off to such an extent, he was showing off that obviously had a bit to drink, and he wanted to show off how beautiful the queen was. Now, the queen did not take kindly to being showing off like an object. No woman ever does, right? No woman ever wants to be shown off like an object. So the queen refused the king's orders. This did not go down well with the king and his advisors. The king's advisors come to him and they say, the queen has denied. The queen is in rebellion against the king. What are all the rest of the women in the kingdom going to do? She's setting a precedent. All of a sudden, all the women in the kingdom are going to start saying no to their husbands. This is going to start a rebellion. You have to make an example out of the queen. And so what the king does is he kicks the queen out of the palace. Got nothing to do with the small girl called Hadassah. She's not even part of the story yet. But over here in the palace, there's a marital issue going on. And the king's advisors come to him and say, King, you still need a queen. Here's a good idea, King. Hold a beauty pageant. Gather all the most beautiful women from your entire kingdom, and when they're all in your palace, you can look at each one of them, have a night with each one of them, and then choose your favorite. It's like the most, like if you actually read the story, it's not a great story, right? It doesn't make men look good. And so they do this, and one of the women that get chosen for this beauty pageant is a girl called Hadassah. She didn't invite this drama into her life. She didn't invite this chaos, this complexity. But because over this side in the palace, there's this marital issue, and they didn't have regional pastors to go to. They didn't have life enrichment team to go talk to. You know, they'd never done Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage. They'd never done any of that kind of stuff. Because they didn't have the tools to handle their marriage issues, they'd invited chaos into their life, but because they invited chaos into their life, it invaded Hadassah's life. And so the king's servants go out and they find Hadassah. They say, oh, you look pretty good, we'll take you in. They bring her into the palace, and all of a sudden, her entire reality changes. In a moment, Hadassah, her entire reality, her life was defined by a Jewish way of living. She was living with her uncle at the time, Mordecai. Her life was going in one direction. Her reality was defined by a situation. And in a moment, everything shifted. In a moment, chaos, drama, complexity invaded her life. And her everything was redefined in a moment. And she gets put into the palace, and all of a sudden what she had known had changed. She was no longer a Jewish girl living with her uncle. She was now this woman being trained for a beauty pageant in a palace. She was no longer Hadassah. She was told her name didn't suit the king or the palace. She was now to be called Esther. Her future was no longer going to be as part of the Jewish people. Her future now became so uncertain. All the girls in that beauty pageant knew only one could win, and no one knew what was going to happen to all the other girls who weren't going to win. Her future became incredibly uncertain. And I wonder in that moment if she began to doubt that God, the God she'd heard about from her uncle, the God that her people prayed to, I wonder if she began to doubt that God was actually in control. Those four things happened. Her reality changed. Her identity changed. Her future became in doubt, and I wonder if she began to doubt God. Now, your drama might not look like Hadassah's. You might not have been involved in a forced beauty pageant. Like if there are any, maybe raise your hands right now. I mean, Pastor DJ, definitely. I mean, why would anyone not involve him into a forced beauty pageant? But for you, your drama that you didn't invite, maybe like a relationship that you thought was going to go the distance, but for some reason it ended far too short. And because that relationship ended far too short, exactly the same thing happened. Your reality doesn't look the same anymore. Your identity has changed. The future that you'd hoped for is no longer the future you bank on. And perhaps because that shifted, you begin to look at God a little bit differently. Perhaps that drama is you were working, you were fine, and all of a sudden you get a retrenchment paper. You no longer have the job you'd been banking on for so long. And you were fine, you were doing well, you worked hard. But now your reality looks so different. You don't know what to do with your days anymore. The future you were working towards is no longer the future you can even have the opportunity to work towards. You now wear the label unemployed, and so your identity is different. And again, you may begin to doubt God. You may begin to look at God differently. Perhaps in a nation like ours, you're a victim of violent crime. And when you're a victim of violent crime, it's exactly the same thing. You have done nothing to invite this into your life. Nothing. But because you've experienced it, you no longer see the world the same way. You don't see South Africa the same way. Your reality has changed. You don't see your future in South Africa the same way. You now begin to see yourself more as a victim than you did before. And you begin to see God differently as well. What this does to us is it shifts. And what I've seen over and over and over in my life, in other people's lives, is uninvited drama, uninvited chaos, uninvited complexity has the potential to do 4 things in our lives. It changes the way we see the world. It changes the way we see our future. It changes the way we see ourselves, and it changes how we see God. Those 4 things should come up now. That's what uninvited drama and chaos has the potential to do. Changes how we see the world, changes how we see our future, and it changes how we see ourselves and how we see God. That's what it has the potential to do. And I'm sure there are people in this room who can testify to this better than I can. The thing about the story of Esther is we can read her whole story. We can read how her story ends. We can read chapter after chapter, day after day, and we can read her whole life. You can't do that for your life. I can't do that for my life. I don't know what the final chapter holds. I don't even know what the next chapter holds. I don't even know what the next page holds in my life. You don't know for your life. But the glory of Esther's story is we can read the whole story, and the hope that's imprinted in her pages can give us hope. I don't know if you remember, if you were here for Martin Steele, he once preached a message and he said, the testimonies, the things that here, what we need to do is we need to clamp on jumper cables and receive everything that's in here and put them straight into our hearts. That's what the story of Esther should do to us. And what we need to do right now is as we unpack the story of Esther, the thing that we need to do is understand that because of what God did for her, God can do the same things for us. God can do exactly the same thing for us. Drama, chaos, complexity, it can invade our space. But that doesn't mean God has changed. You see, drama may catch us by surprise. It never catches God by surprise. God cannot be caught by surprise. It may make us see reality differently, but God has not changed. God created the world. God still knows what the world is about. It may make us look at ourselves differently, but God created us. Exactly what Murray was saying. God created us in our mother's womb. God doesn't look at us differently. It may make us look at our future differently, but God's already in our future. He's calling us into our future. God, it may make us see God differently, but God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. God is the Ancient of Days. He does not change. And so when drama invades our space, when chaos invades our space, we may change our viewpoint, but God never shifts. God cannot shift. For those of you who don't know the story of Esther, it's an incredible account. Here's this woman who gets pulled out of everything she knows, and she wins the beauty pageant. There's an incredible story of humility, and I don't want to go into it all now, but there's a story of humility and grace, and she becomes the wife of the king. She becomes the queen. But there's a backstory behind this as well. There's a story about her uncle and a man by the name of Haman. And Haman goes and he gets so angry with the Jewish nation that there's a genocide planned. Haman has got so much influence and power in the kingdom at that time that he goes to the king and says, "King, we need to get rid of these people." And so literally as you read the story, a date is set. And it's gazetted. The king signs the document. A date is set where the Jews are legally allowed to be murdered by anyone and everyone in the kingdom. Think about that. Think about the justice implications of that. A date is set where anyone in the kingdom is allowed to pick up arms and murder every single Jewish person in the kingdom. A genocide is planned and authorized by the highest authority in the kingdom. And here's Esther, the queen, who is a Jew. The king at this point doesn't know she's a Jew. Like they obviously have communication issues in their marriage. Like at some point you ask about the family. Like at some point, at some point over dinner, you're like, "So where do you come from? Tell me a little bit about yourself." Like at some point you have that conversation in your marriage. Apparently it never happened. And then there's this incredible account. Mordecai hears about the story, her uncle. He hears about the plot about genocide, and he knows that Esther has not gone through this chaos, has not gone through this drama for no reason. And in Esther chapter 4, verse 13, Mordecai sends this to Esther. Mordecai told him to reply to Esther, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from any other place, but you and your father's house will perish." And then here's his words. "And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" See, Mordecai had a different picture. Mordecai saw things differently. He's saying to Esther, "Hang on, Esther." And the nice, easy thing to say out of this is everything has a purpose. But he was saying more than that. Mordecai was saying something much bigger than this. Look at, Mordecai was saying, Esther, remember the big picture here. Remember who God is. Remember the God of all the universe. God is still the deliverer of his people. God is still the one who rescued our people through Moses. God is still the one who is positioning you. God is still God. God has not changed. Just because there's a newsletter gone out from the king, that has not usurped the authority of God over the world. God is still God. What he's saying to Esther is, Esther, don't forget who you are. Esther, don't for a moment forget who you are. They may have changed your name. They may have given you a different wardrobe. They may have even put a crown on your head, but you are still part of the people of God. You are still chosen and separated by God for his purposes in this world. Do not forget for a moment that there is a calling on your life for his purposes. Do not forget that your life is part of his story. Your life counts for something. Don't hide in the shadows when God is up to something. Don't forget that, Esther. Esther, don't forget there's a future at stake. I love what he says. If you hide now, your whole father's line will be wiped out. He's saying this, there's a future at stake, Esther. You can hide your head in the sand now, but Esther, don't lose sight of the future. Don't let the drama that's invading your life now make you lose sight of what's at stake in the future. Esther, don't lose sight of the future. And you're saying, Esther, your world has changed so much. Esther, you started out as a young girl in my home. You were part of a farming business. Most people believe she was part of a farming business. You were part of a group of people that tended the flocks and looked after some fields, and your life has changed so much. Now you have servants coming and going. Now you're part of a royal family. Now your world has changed so much. But don't for a moment forget just whose world it actually is. And then he says, and all of that has led you to this point for such a time as this. For such a time as this. Now, I don't know the drama, the chaos, the complexity that may have invaded your life. I don't know where you are. Perhaps there's nothing in your life right now. Thank you, Jesus. Like if there's no drama in your life right now, your worship should be better than any of ours. You should be jumping higher than any of us in the front right now. Praising better than any of us. But Jesus promised us that in this world we will face trouble, tribulation, chaos, complexity, drama. It's like, Jesus, that's not a promise I want to hold on to. But when that comes, I pray you would have the voice of Mordecai in your life. I pray that the voice of Mordecai would echo in your ears and you would be reminded of the fact that there are some truths that we can hold on to in the midst of chaos. And if no one else is going to be your Mordecai, can I be your Mordecai this morning? Can I be the one to remind you of some truths that are so important for us to hold on to? You are not what chaos tells you you are. Chaos cannot define who you are because God has bought you with a price. You do not belong to chaos. You belong to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And what Jesus says about you is that you are loved beyond measure. That you are what He says you are. You are not a victim. You are more than a conqueror through Christ Jesus who strengthens you. That's who you are. You are not what the world says you are. You are awesome. You are healed and whole. You are not broken. There is so much potential inside of you because He put it in you when He knitted you together in your mother's womb. You are who God says you are. Nothing more, nothing less. You are everything that Jesus promises you to be. And so hold on to those things. Hold on to who Jesus says you are. That's what we need to hold on to. You are a royal priesthood, called out to live in the power and presence of the Holy Spirit. That's what you are. Secondly, can I remind you, God is still God. That has not changed. God did not go on holiday. God did not take a break. God did not look at the world and go, I'm out. God is still God. God is still the God who heals. God is still the God who provides. God is still the God who moves mountains and makes dead things rise. God is still God. God has not changed because chaos moved into your neighborhood. God has not changed. God is still the God that flung the stars into the galaxy just so that we could have an inkling of His glory. That is still the God that we serve. The drama and chaos that's in your life has not diminished His glory by 1 millimeter. That is still the God that we serve. God is still God. Thirdly, your future is in God's hands. Don't let chaos doubt your future for a second. What's going on in your reality right now may make you doubt that there's a future, but your future is secure in the one who doesn't adhere to the bounds of time. Jesus is not limited by time, and so He's already in your future crafting it for you. He's calling you into your future. Don't doubt your future. God says, I know the plans I have for you. I know the future I'm calling you into. He could only know it if He's already there. Don't doubt your future. Don't doubt it for a second. Don't let the chaos of the now make you doubt the God of tomorrow. He's there. He's got it in His hands. And if you would trust Him, you can step into it with faith. And lastly, just because now, the world we're in now, the reality you're faced with now seems tough, don't doubt that God has it. Don't doubt that God is at work right now. Don't doubt that God has got all things in His hands. The Bible tells us that all things work together for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. Just because you've gone through some stuff and it's changed the way you see the world, don't doubt that God has lost control. Don't think that God has lost control of the world. God is still in control. God is still God. Just because we may look at things differently, just because our reality may look a bit different because of what we've gone through, doesn't mean God has lost control of the world. I say this quite often. God is often more at work behind the scenes than He is in front of our face. And just because you can't see what He's doing doesn't mean He's not doing anything. So you might not be facing chaos now, you might not be facing complexity or drama, but when it comes, what do we do when an ostrich runs out of nowhere and knocks our car? Next time you see an ostrich, you're going to remember this stuff. What do we do when that ostrich comes? I want to remind you of 4 things. What do we do? What do we do when that ostrich runs out of nowhere, writes off our plans, writes off where we're going, derails all of our stuff? What do we do when we've created room, all of our simplicity is good? What do we do? I want to say 4 things to you. Remember these 4 things. Number 1, God is still God. Number 2, I am still God's. You are not what chaos says you are. You are still God's. Number 3, the world is still God's. The world still belongs to God. The world hasn't become anything. And my future, number 4, my future is still God's. Those 4 things, no matter what chaos, drama, complexity comes your way, God is still God. I am still God's. The world is still God's. And my future is still God's. If you can let those things resound in your mind when drama, complexity, chaos comes your way, I pray that no matter what happens this year for the rest of your life, when that ostrich runs out of the bushes, when that ostrich writes off your plans, that you would let these 4 phrases resound in your mind. God is still God. I am still God's. The world is still God's. And my future is still God's. Amen.